A Malaysia Airlines flight with 239 people on board, including 4 Americans, has gone missing. At this hour, a desperate search is underway for MH Flight 370.
The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 was one of the most shocking aviation mysteries in modern history. But this was not the first time a plane vanished without a trace. Across decades and continents, other aircraft have simply disappeared, leaving behind grieving families, abandoned theories, and nothing but silence in the skies. If you thought MH370 was a singular tragedy, you may want to buckle up.
We begin this morning with a desperate search at sea after a jet carrying 239 people vanished off the southern coast of Vietnam.
The truth is far stranger and far more disturbing than most realize. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. On March 16, 1962, Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 lifted off from Guam on a quiet morning, headed toward the Philippines. On board were 93 souls, most of them American military personnel. The aircraft, a Lockheed Super Constellation, was part of a chartered military operation, transporting troops and equipment during a tense period of the Cold War. Nothing about the departure suggested anything would go wrong. The skies were clear, the aircraft was functioning normally, and the flight crew was experienced. There were no warning signs, no last-minute issues, and no distress call. Somewhere over the Philippine Sea, the plane simply vanished. When contact was lost, military officials immediately scrambled a massive rescue operation. Over 1,000 personnel, 13 aircraft, and 8 naval vessels scoured nearly 200,000 square miles of ocean for more than a week. They found nothing. Not a single seat cushion, not a shred of wreckage, not an oil slick, not even a floating life vest. For the families back home, the uncertainty became a slow, burning agony. Some held on to hope for weeks, convinced the plane might have made an emergency landing on a remote island. But as time passed and search efforts failed, hope curdled into despair. What made the case even more baffling was that just before the plane vanished, a passing civilian tanker reported seeing a brilliant flash of light in the sky, followed by a trail of smoke. Was it an explosion? A missile strike? A mid-air collision? The Flying Tiger Line insisted that the aircraft had been well maintained. No mechanical issues had been reported. The flight path had been normal until everything stopped. The US military never confirmed any cause. Theories ranged from sabotage to electrical failure, even the possibility of a mid-air collision with a spy aircraft that might have been in the area at the time. Some speculated the aircraft could have been downed by an unknown object, given the lack of debris. But these were theories with no proof. With no black box, no wreckage, and no survivors, the event remained a void. To this day, Flight 739 is listed as missing, with all 93 souls presumed dead. The case remains one of the greatest unsolved disappearances in American military aviation history. It left families without closure, and aviation experts with more questions than answers. When people say it's impossible for a modern aircraft to vanish without a trace, Flight 739 stands as a reminder that it has happened before, and it may happen again. But was this an isolated military mystery, or just the beginning of a longer pattern? What happens when a world-famous aviator vanishes into the clouds without a whisper of evidence? Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. She was more than just a pilot. Amelia Earhart was a global icon.
Amelia Earhart demonstrates a real knack for flying.
A symbol of progress, independence, and the boundless possibilities of aviation. By the 1930s, she had already become the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean.
The first female pilot to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean.
And she had inspired an entire generation of aviators. But in 1937, during her most ambitious challenge yet, she vanished. Her goal was to fly around the world with her navigator Fred Noonan, following a route that would take them across continents and oceans. They had already completed the majority of the journey when they approached one of the final legs. From Lae, New Guinea, to a tiny speck of land called Howland Island in the Pacific. It was July 2nd when the pair took off from Leh. Their aircraft, a Lockheed Model 10 Electra, was heavily modified for the journey and carried extra fuel tanks in place of most of the passenger seats. The US Coast Guard cutter Itasca had been stationed near Howland Island to provide communication and navigation assistance. But something went wrong. Earhart's radio messages were reportedly faint, and she seemed unsure of her position. The crew aboard the Itasca could hear her, but she could not hear them. Her final transmission indicated that they were running low on fuel and searching for the island. After that, silence. The Coast Guard, the Navy, and private searchers spent weeks scouring over 250,000 square miles of ocean. Nothing turned up. No aircraft debris, no life rafts, no emergency signals. As the days turned to weeks, theories began to swirl. Did the plane crash into the ocean and sink beyond reach? Did they land on an uninhabited island and eventually succumb to the elements? One controversial theory suggested they were captured by Japanese forces who controlled several islands in the region, and that they may have died in custody. Another claimed they assumed new identities and lived out their lives in secret. There were even alleged photographs that some believed showed Earhart alive in captivity, but none were ever confirmed. What makes the mystery so persistent is not just the lack of physical evidence, but the symbolic weight of who she was. Amelia Earhart represented everything the world was beginning to believe about human potential. Her vanishing felt like a betrayal of that belief, as if the sky itself had swallowed its most promising daughter. Fred Noonan, her skilled but often overlooked navigator, also became a footnote in a mystery that refused to rest. Even in recent decades, expeditions have continued in the hopes of finding answers. Researchers have searched tiny islands, studied underwater sonar data, and even examined bones discovered on Nikomaroro Island, a remote atoll in the Pacific. Some scientists claimed the remains matched Earhart's body measurements, while others dismissed the findings as inconclusive. Still, the evidence remains elusive, and so the story lives on, not just as a historical puzzle, but as a cultural ghost story. What really happened to Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan? Was it a tragic accident caused by limited fuel and outdated navigation, or something far stranger? And if this could happen to one of the most famous aviators on Earth, what does it say about the safety of others who followed? As the 20th century marched forward, the world hoped aviation mysteries would fade. But then, over the Atlantic, another disaster struck, and though debris was eventually found, the full truth remained just out of reach. Air France Flight 47. When Air France Flight 447 took off from Rio de Janeiro on May 31st, 2009, it was just another routine transatlantic journey. The Airbus A330 was heading to Paris, cruising at high altitude through the night. On board were 228 people from 32 countries. The flight was expected to arrive without issue, as millions do each year. But somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, the aircraft disappeared. No mayday was issued, no distress call made. Air traffic controllers simply stopped hearing from the plane. One moment it was on radar, the next it was gone. The initial reaction was disbelief. This was not the early age of aviation. This was an advanced, modern aircraft flying one of the most heavily trafficked international routes in the world. The weather reports noted turbulence and storm activity, but nothing out of the ordinary. When Flight 447 failed to arrive in Paris, search teams were dispatched immediately. For days, the vast ocean yielded no clues. Then, fragments of wreckage and bodies began washing up along the northeast coast of Brazil. Life vests, airplane seats, pieces of fuselage. But still, the full wreckage lay hidden far beneath the surface. The French Bureau of Investigation, along with Brazilian and international authorities, launched a multi-year search using deep-sea robots and sonar scanning equipment. Finally, in 2011, the black boxes were located nearly 4,000 meters underwater. What investigators discovered painted a chilling picture. The plane had flown into a zone of intense thunderstorm activity, and the pitot tubes, small instruments that measure airspeed, had iced over. This caused the autopilot to disconnect. The crew, suddenly flying manually, became disoriented. The co-pilot reacted by pulling the nose of the plane upward, which caused it to stall. For nearly 4 minutes, the aircraft descended in a stalled position until it impacted the ocean. Technically, the mystery had been solved, but the emotional and procedural aftermath was devastating. The flight crew had followed instinct, not training. In the dark, with instruments failing, they had misjudged their situation. Aviation experts around the world asked how this could happen in such a modern aircraft. Why had the pilots not understood that they were in a stall? Why had the airline not trained them better for such scenarios? Lawsuits were filed. Air France and Airbus were both criticized for inadequate training and design flaws. What made Flight 447's case unique was that it straddled the line between mystery and explanation. Unlike Earhart or Flying Tiger Line, this case produced wreckage and data, but it still left unanswered questions. Could a different crew have saved the plane? Should the sensors have been built differently? Should air traffic control have noticed the plane's silence sooner? This crash reminded the world that disappearance doesn't always mean total invisibility. Sometimes the wreckage is found, but the emotional closure is not. For the families of the victims, knowing how it happened offered some comfort, but not enough. The vast silence of the ocean had kept them waiting for years, and as history would show, even military aircraft in tightly controlled airspace could suffer the same fate. Just a few years later, in the skies above the Bay of Bengal, another aircraft would vanish without explanation. Would this one be found? Or would it join the growing list of planes lost forever? Indian Air Force AN-32. It was July 22, 2016, when an Indian Air Force AN-32 transport aircraft lifted off from Chennai. Its destination was Port Blair, the capital of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. On board were 29 people, a mix of Indian military personnel, engineers, and maintenance staff. The aircraft was a workhorse of the Indian Air Force, twin-engined, rugged and used for years to ferry people and supplies across the country's more remote outposts. The flight path was routine, crossing the Bay of Bengal, a body of water notorious for unpredictable weather and vast, empty stretches. But what happened during this journey was anything but routine. Just 30 minutes after takeoff, radar contact with the aircraft was lost. No emergency signal was sent. No communication was received. It was as though the AN-32 had evaporated into the clouds. The Indian government responded quickly. A massive search and rescue operation was launched, involving the Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and satellite imaging.
What's the latest that you're picking up in terms of the search operation? Has any success been achieved so far?
Ships combed the waters. Aircraft scanned miles of sea and coastline. Submarines were even deployed in hopes of detecting any submerged signal from the aircraft's emergency locator. Nothing surfaced. Not a single piece of wreckage. Not a floating life jacket. Not a scrap of metal. Not even an oil slick.
News now of the missing Indian Air Force AN-32 aircraft. Vishnu Shom joining us on the phone line from the capital.
This level of disappearance raised urgent questions. How could a large military aircraft simply vanish in the modern age? Theories began to circulate, ranging from sudden mechanical failure to mid-air disintegration caused by structural fatigue. The weather that day had reportedly been rough, with the possibility of convective storms that could create extreme turbulence. But even under such conditions, experienced pilots are trained to reroute or ascend to safer altitudes. Some suspected that the aircraft's systems may have failed so completely and so suddenly that the crew had no time to react. The AN-32 was not equipped with modern flight tracking systems like ADS-B, which are common in commercial airliners. This made tracking and locating it even more difficult. Furthermore, the Bay of Bengal's undersea terrain is complex, with deep trenches and uneven topography that make sonar scanning incredibly challenging. After weeks of scouring the region with zero results, the official search was scaled back. The families of the missing, desperate for answers, were left in agonizing limbo. The Indian government never officially closed the case, but hopes of finding the aircraft diminished with time. Unlike commercial airliners that often attract international attention and resources, this was a military transport flight with fewer international eyes on it. Yet the loss was no less devastating. Behind the uniformed crew were mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. Their photos hung in living rooms across India, their names recited at memorials, but their fates remained unresolved. What truly haunted observers was the complete absence of any trace. Planes have crashed in forests, oceans, deserts, and mountains, and eventually someone finds something. But the AN-32 joined that rare, unsettling category of aircraft that left behind only questions. Could a single storm bring down such a well-built plane? Was there a catastrophic failure in the aircraft's electrical or hydraulic systems? Or could something more unusual have occurred, such as a mid-air explosion or navigational miscalculation that sent it off course? Even years later, the incident remained a painful mystery within Indian aviation history. Families continued to ask for new searches. Politicians called for better tracking systems on military flights. Investigators quietly speculated that if the wreckage ever was found, it might be in such a remote or deep location that recovery would be nearly impossible. The silence left by the AN-32's disappearance is heavy, not just for India, but for a global aviation community that still cannot explain why, in an age of satellite monitoring and real-time tracking, airplanes can still fall off the face of the Earth. And yet, this was not the first time aircraft had disappeared without a trace in this part of the world. There is one region so infamous for unexplained vanishings that its very name evokes mystery. When 5 fully operational military aircraft vanished in perfect weather without sending a single call for help, the story went from tragedy to legend. What happened in this next case would fuel theories for decades and ignite the myth of the Bermuda Triangle. Flight 19 and the Bermuda Triangle. In the early afternoon of December 5th, 1945, 5 US Navy TBM Avenger torpedo bombers lifted off from Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station in Florida for a routine training mission. The weather was clear, the sea calm, and the young flight crews were well trained. Known collectively as Flight 19, their assignment was simple: fly a triangular course over the Atlantic Ocean, drop practice bombs, then return. This was a standard drill flown hundreds of times before. But what happened to Flight 19 would become one of the most haunting aviation mysteries in history, spawning decades of speculation and myth. Everything proceeded normally at first. The pilots flew southeast to their first checkpoint and began to make their scheduled turns. But not long after, strange radio messages began filtering in. The flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, reported that his compass was malfunctioning. He no longer knew which direction was west, and he feared the planes were flying in the wrong direction. His voice grew more frantic as he attempted to reorient the formation. The other pilots, some of them just 18 or 19 years old, followed orders without question, but there was growing confusion over whether they were flying toward the Florida coast or deeper into the Atlantic. As radio operators on the ground tried to assist, Taylor's transmissions grew more disjointed. He claimed the ocean looked strange, and that they might be flying over the Florida Keys, which was impossible based on their actual position. Then came silence. One by one, the signals from the aircraft went dark. No more messages, no more coordinates. 5 planes, 14 men, all gone. Hours later, a massive search and rescue operation was launched. Boats, planes, helicopters, and divers were dispatched to comb the area where the aircraft were last seen. But nothing turned up. Not a single piece of debris. No bodies, no floating wreckage. It was as if they had never existed. As if that were not strange enough, a PBM Mariner aircraft sent out as part of the rescue effort also vanished just hours later, with 13 crew members on board. Witnesses on a nearby tanker reported seeing a bright flash in the sky and a fireball hitting the water. Although the Navy later attributed this second disappearance to a likely mid-air explosion, the eerie coincidence only deepened the sense of mystery surrounding the original event. Over the years, Flight 19 became the poster child for the so-called Bermuda Triangle, a loosely defined region of the Atlantic bounded by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Dozens of books, documentaries, and television specials speculated wildly about what could have happened. Theories ranged from magnetic anomalies and rogue waves to alien abduction and interdimensional portals. Some researchers suggested that Taylor's compass failure triggered a navigational error that took the planes hundreds of miles off course, where they eventually ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean. Others believed the entire formation could have been brought down by a sudden and violent storm. But none of these explanations fully satisfy, because no physical evidence has ever been found. What makes the story of Flight 19 so enduring is the sheer improbability of it. 5 military aircraft flying together in good weather, led by an experienced pilot, should not simply disappear. And yet they did. In the years since, the US Navy has revised its records, removing unknown causes and stating the most probable explanation was pilot error. But that official stance has not erased public fascination or the chilling feeling that something more mysterious may have occurred. Flight 19 reminds us that even the most advanced training and the most routine missions can end in complete mystery. It leaves us with more than missing aircraft. It leaves us with the unsettling idea that some parts of our world may still defy explanation. And as we turn to the final case in this list, we return to the most recent and perhaps most emotionally charged disappearance of all. A modern jetliner, filled with everyday passengers, vanished in our own time. What happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, and why does it still haunt us today? Somewhere above the clouds, or perhaps beneath the ocean's surface, these planes and the people aboard them are still missing, not just from the sky, but from the lives of their families, their countries, and the history books that can only guess at what really happened. In a world filled with satellites, sensors, and supercomputers, these vanishings remind us how fragile and mysterious air travel can still be. Maybe one day we'll finally get the answers. Until then, the sky keeps its secrets. Which of these stories do you think will be solved first, if ever? Let us know below, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to keep digging into the mysteries the world still hasn't cracked.